Hello, friends. Is it happening? Are we here? Grade school? I always want to make sure I can actually see my camera feed. Now I can. That must mean we're live. Hello, everybody. We got a good sesh today. Today we are going to be talking about cinematography and the way it relates to color grading and some of the lessons that I've learned about cinematography in my grading practice. So it's going to be a great session today. Get your questions ready if you've got topics or things you want to discuss in this area. We'll have plenty of time to hit those too. And I'm excited to dive in with you guys. I got a lot going on over here, guys. Thank you all for your patience for getting started an hour behind the slated time. We got earthquakes happening over here in Southern California this morning. All kinds of madness happening. But anyway, I'm glad to be with you guys now. My buddy Ralph is here with me. What's going on, Ralph?
Hello, everyone. I was just talking about how NAB looks so fun, and I was here in Europe alone, but I've been editing this whole week. It's funny because every time I'm here, I say that the last week has been something different. But yeah, I've been editing the last week mainly and looking at NAB with jealousy.
Yeah, dude, we missed you there. NAB was a really, really fun time this year. For those who don't know, I went out to NAB last week for a really quick just day trip to connect with some of our core community members who were there from all over the different corners of the planet. So it was really great to connect in person with our community members and with color grading geeks and motion imaging geeks even more broadly in general for a couple hours at NAB. I didn't really look at any gear or any software. I'll catch up on that stuff later, including Resolve 20, which we got to talk about maybe in our next grade school session. But what I definitely got to do was hang out with a bunch of really cool color geeks and community members who I've known online for a really long time, and it's always really weird meeting them in person. The main thing that's always a wild card is like, how tall is that person going to be? I don't know. They could be like this, they could be like that. No clue, no way to know until you meet in person. So I feel like I want to start like making friendly wagers on that with myself or others. But anyway, I digress. That's enough nonsense for me. Let's get started. We're here to learn. We're here to talk about cinematography and color grading. So I've got a couple really simple ideas that I want to share with you guys here. These are ideas that I humbly submit to you from the color grading post-production side, and I'm submitting to the production side. So these are things that if you are a cinematographer or if you're working on the production side, I think you're going to find to be really actionable, really simple, really helpful in your practice when you're out there shooting. If you are a colorist or you're working on the post side, these are things that you can share with your collaborators that I think are going to really help them to simplify their process and to get better results and to have more fun along the way, I hope. So we're going to talk through these things, and then as I said, any other topics, ideas you guys have around this area, I'm very game to dive into. I am nowhere near an expert on cinematography. I wanted to be a cinematographer when I first got started in this game many, many years ago, but I learned really quickly that I like to be indoors and I like to work like 8 hours is like a long day for me. So there are some incompatibilities there with being out on set and on location for long days and out of doors and all that stuff. But I still love cinematography very much, and I've picked up a thing or two about it from the cinematographers I've worked with and from having to look at lots and lots and lots of different camera negative gathered with different intentions under different circumstances with different ideas going into it. So hopefully we'll have some fun things to talk about today in terms of what I've picked up about cinematography from my comfortable little corner of the color cave. Okay, so here's the number one thing I want to talk to you guys about. Let's get some resolve going on here. By the way, I set things up a little bit quickly this morning. Everyone can hear and see me okay, right? Is that all working, Ralph?
Yeah, everything is working, but my voice has a little bit of echo. That's the only thing.
Okay. The old vocal echo. I feel like that's something we got to figure out. Well, good. I'm glad you guys can all hear and see me, such as I am. Let's get into some resolve here. This first one, this is something that we've talked about before that is fairly self-explanatory, but always helpful to reiterate. There we go. I got my cool little circle going on. Loving it. All right, so here's the first thing I want to talk to you guys about. The number one thing that you can do for yourself to like level up your work in production when you're shooting stuff is to use what I call a high context viewing transform. All that really means is a custom LUT, or what that functionally means most of the time is a custom LUT, but I specifically phrase it in this way, a high context viewing transform, because really what I'm trying to do in encouraging you to shoot through this type of transform is not to have a cool look or to be part of the cool crowd of like, oh, we did our custom LUT and someone built it for us. It's really more to give you context so that you can create images on the day, not just, as my friend Steve Yedlin talks about, not just gather data. Like that's what cameras are fundamentally set up to do, is just to gather data. But I think one of the sort of like gaps that comes up often in digital cinematography these days is we think about that idea, people will adopt that idea, but then they're kind of in that mode as they're capturing the image. Like we don't want to be, and this is my take for you guys to think about and decide where you land on this. I don't believe that we want to be out there gathering data. I think you want to be out there making images, right? The camera is gathering the data, but you don't want to be gathering the data in the sense that like you're looking at, you know, whatever, like a flat log image, or the slightly less extreme version of this, just looking through a camera manufacturer LUT. I was talking with some students last week about camera manufacturer LUTs and about, you know, like the question came up of like, man, like, why do you talk so much smack on these camera LUTs? And I was like, look, it's a fair question. Like, here, let me turn this off, and we're just going to look through the lens of a normal camera LUT for a second. And, you know, like I responded, I was like, honestly, that's a fair question. Like, I do talk a lot of smack, and it's like, shouldn't the camera manufacturers know pretty well how to make a functional viewing transform for their own camera? And my answer is absolutely yes. I think camera manufacturer LUTs actually do an impeccable job of what they're designed to do, with a little bit of variation. But like this camera viewing LUT in particular that we're looking at right now, Aries LUT for dealing with log C3 material, it does exactly what it means to do. Like it's not like someone made a mistake or someone lacks the sophistication to do something better. The thing is, when you're thinking about every scenario under which someone will be using an Alexa, high contrast, low contrast, day, night, you know, like cinematic, like all these different like modes and conditions that the camera is going to be used under, they have to solve for all of those with their viewing transform. Quick side note, we can dive into this deeper later. As many of you guys know, some may not, there is no single correct solution for getting from camera or scene space into display space. It always involves some subjective trade-offs and some subjective decisions about how you intend to see that image rendered, okay? So the way that camera manufacturers are designing their LUTs to render the image, to put it in a word, is safely. So like, it just kind of needs to look good all the time. It needs to look good with high contrast, low contrast, night, day, you know, making movies, making documentaries, whatever it might be. It just needs to look good and make whatever image is passing through it look decent, okay? So in that sense, there's nothing wrong with a camera manufacturer LUT. It is a fundamentally sound and level starting position for monitoring your image and evaluating your image. But here's the thing, unless you plan to do no color grade, and unless you are, if you're not going to be doing any color grade at all, this might be a really good place to have your image parked and to like lens it through. But this, think about it this way, what we're looking at right now, I'm just going to move this node over here to simplify things a little bit. What we're looking at right now has basically nothing to do with what the creatives are going to want to do in the color grade. Or if it does have something to do with it, it's kind of by accident, right? Like no one's choosing, in general, no one's choosing a camera manufacturer LUT because they're like, wow, this perfectly embodies the direction that I wish to take the image in the grade. They're just grabbing it because it's convenient and because they feel like it's trustworthy, right? Which is not a like terrible motivation, but that's very different than saying, this represents my creative intent. So going back to my theme here, use a high context viewing transform. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that you have built a show LUT, or if you have collaborated with a colorist to build a show LUT that actually reflects your general creative preference or aesthetic preference for the way you like to see images rendered, or reflects your specific creative intent for the project that you are color grading, okay? So there's a couple things that that's going to do for you. The number one thing is it's going to allow you to take advantage of your single most valuable asset as a cinematographer. I was asking these students who I mentioned a moment ago, I asked the question last week, what's the cinematographer's single most valuable asset? I'm going to let you guys answer that question for yourselves for a minute, and then I will give you my answer. It's kind of a trick question. It's definitely a simpler answer than you think. Okay? What is your single most valuable tool, your single most valuable asset as a cinematographer? It's your eyes. That's what we all got into this for, is that we've got some visual acumen, we've got visual sensitivity, we've got visual preference, we've got visual taste. That's what we all have in common as motion imaging artists. If we didn't care about images, if we were insensitive to or indifferent to images, we would be in a different business, wouldn't we? So when we think about giving ourselves the opportunity to use our most valuable tool, that's only going to happen if we're seeing the image that we're capturing through the lens, if you want to call it that, or through the sort of vantage of what we intend to do with that image in the grade. Otherwise, it's just kind of an abstract exercise. Like if we look at, kind of where we're at right now, and if I turn this off and just flip to a different pipeline, the pipeline that I kind of had in place a moment ago when we started talking about this stuff, these are very different images, right? I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger for you guys. So here's the camera manufacturer LUT. Here is my rendering, which is just an arbitrary one, but I've done it intentionally to illustrate the difference here, okay? Very different renderings of image. Camera viewing LUT and final rendering. And here's what I'm gonna suggest to you guys. Here's the part that really matters. This is not a simple matter of like, well, it's gonna look so much better when we get into color. The decisions that you make are likely going to change when you're looking at this versus that, okay? So you want to give yourself the opportunity to make good decisions. And this really relates to what I'm talking about when I'm talking about creating images, not just gathering data on set. You want to feel empowered to make specific, bold decisions that cause you to love what you're seeing in the image. And you want to be fundamentally in a mode of like, I'm making something right now. I'm not gathering raw materials for something that's going to be done later. That's always going to be a part of the process. At least I hope it's always going to be a part of your process, that you're going to be able to go in and do a proper color grade after the fact. But what's funny and what I've observed is the further that the creative agenda gets pushed on set, the further still that we can push it when we get into the color grade. Does that make sense? So it's kind of a two-parter there as to like what the real like driving difference or like motivator should be for doing that. Number one, having a high context viewing transform is going to take you out of the mode of like, I'm doing some abstract exercise and put you into the mode of like, I'm gathering images right now that are supposed to turn me on. I'm supposed to love what I'm seeing right now. If I don't, I need to go do something about it. I need to change the way that I'm lighting or staging or framing or lensing this scene, right? Like that's what we're now trying to accomplish. And the second thing is it's not just going to change your decisions in the sense that you will feel more empowered to make bold decisions, but practically it's going to change your decisions. There's a higher contrast ratio here than here. That's likely going to change the amount of fill light that I bring in or choose not to bring in. Like those decisions are going to change based on the context that I'm given from my viewing transform. That's why we want it to be a high context viewing transform. Does that make sense? Okay. Next up. This is another really simple one, just a great rule of thumb that like I share with almost every cinematographer who I work with, just as like, hey, desert island, if you could, give 3 tips to, any cinematographer or collaborator that you feel like would help them based on your experience as a colorist. I just gave you the first one, like use a viewing transform that's going to help. Here's another one that like is like very high on that list, something that's just super helpful to keep in mind pretty much all the time. Keep the image off the floor. You guys know what I mean when I say that? I'm talking about the noise floor of the sensor. Something that is a ground truth of the type of sensor that every major digital cinema camera uses is that none of them perform very well or yield very great looking images down in the floor. There is a noise floor that just doesn't feel very good in general. We have a whole video on this topic actually on exposing to the right that I can grab a link for you guys to, or Raf, if you have a chance, grab a link to that exposed to the right video and we can drop it in there. In particular, go and check out that video and go and check out what I was able to do with different brackets of exposure of the same image, and the fact that there's an image that at its base, I'm able to get like the underexposed brackets back up to a level place, and like the subject feels healthy and it's almost difficult to tell which is which, except there's a little bit more texture on her face. Like in the middle of the image, kind of feels fine. But what's interesting is when you look at that video or at other experiments like it, what you lose is differentiation down in the low end of the image, which is one of the most critical things to the human eye. It's one of the things that I am most passionate about shaping. It's one of the things that I am looking at and seeing. When I see it done really well, I know I'm looking at the work of a more experienced colorist, and it's one of the things that I see less experienced colorists just not quite able to shape out as much as they should, which is the way that bottom end of the image feels. The separation between tones, the connection between tones, the feeling of depth, the feeling of richness, the feeling of visibility, legibility. These are all these things that really require finesse and skill and expertise and training to do well. But I can have all the finesse and skill and expertise in the world as your colorist, and if you rode that image too close to the floor, there's going to be stuff down there that cannot be differentiated. It's just going to be hard to dig out. I think in the video that I'm mentioning, the example was like the individual strands of the subject's like dark hair. It's like roughly the color of my hair. It's just no longer differentiatable, if that's a word. I think that's a word. Even as I open up the exposure, it's just clumped to black because those subtle variations, those tones that actually were differentiated in the scene, all got clumped into the bottom of the sensor. So keep the image off the sensor. I'm gonna like straight up steal a piece of advice that a DP friend of mine gave when we were doing a panel on exposure now almost a year ago that I just thought sounded so smart. What he essentially does in order to guarantee that he's able to control ISO, which is a huge factor in managing your noise floor. Basically, like if you want to simplify it even more, keep the image off the floor. That basically means is like, hey, don't crank ISO, get more light. I know that's easier said than done. It's very easy for me to say from my comfortable color cave that like, oh, you just got to get more light. Sometimes there is no more light, but that's a very different thing than just boosting your ISO. But what my friend does in order to basically guarantee he never needs to boost his ISO beyond where he wishes it to be parked optimally is at the very beginning of the process of the day, he'll slot in like multiple stops of ND, neutral density, and then light to that in such a way that at any point if light is being lost or if they need to get a hotter exposure onto the sensor, instead of boosting ISO or opening up iris, because that's also a creative parameter that is dictated by how you want your depth of field to be, how soft or sharp you want things to be, those things he can now keep constant, his like ISO as well as his iris, and instead his degree of freedom, what he does when he needs to get more light onto the sensor, is he will pull those NDs that were added in at the beginning of the day. It sounds so simple, but I was like blown away at what a smart recommendation I thought that was when he mentioned it in that panel a year ago. So all a long way of saying, keep the image off the noise floor. And really the way to do that is to maintain your ISO. The way to figure out where the right ISO is for you, where you get enough differentiation in the low end, is to test. We're gonna talk more about testing in just a minute, but that's the reality, is like that's gonna differ for camera, that's gonna differ per camera, differ per project, differ per like your creative taste and what you wanna see sort of separated and shaped out in the low end of the image. So it's going to be particular to you, but once you figure out what that is, where is my optimal distribution of dynamic range, to use a more fancy term, you want to find a way to live there as much as possible and to do whatever you need to do to allow you to live there and to make plans to be able to stay there, if that makes sense. Okay, number 3. We teed this one up just a second ago. Test. Test, 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 test. You gotta test stuff. And I emphasize this because, again, like I just said a minute ago, it's very easy for me to say, oh, you should just go do a bunch of shootout tests in order to compare A to B to C and then decide which is going to be the best outcome or which is going to be best for your creative intent. It's very easy for me to say that, right? Like I can test all day. I do test all day in the box over here. And it's dirt simple because all I got to do is try out different combinations of nodes. I don't have to bring in gear. I don't need people. I don't need crew. I can just try things out infinitely. It's a lot harder in production, right? But that's exactly why I make the point. End of the day, there is no substitute. If you're asking the question, which is going to be better, A versus B? Which is going to be better, ISO 1600 or 800? Or put it another way, can I get away with shooting as my base ISO for this project? Can I get away with shooting 1600 just all the way through? Or do I really need to be at 1280 or 800? There is no way to truly confidently answer that question without running tests. And that's not terribly convenient, but that's why the point needs emphasis. You got to make time. You got to find a way to budget the time and the resources to shoot your tests, because they are going to be such a multiplier to what you're actually going to do when you go to shoot the images for a particular project, or just in general for building up your knowledge and your expertise and your confidence with the way that you do things on set. So it's very easy to buy into camera hype or to buy into what others are saying on YouTube or in Reddit threads, even to what I'm saying, right? Like it's very easy to subscribe to a methodology or a prescription for how to do a particular thing or how to shoot in general. But one of the reasons it's so easy is because it's a lot less work and a lot less energy than going out there and testing. So that's the number three. I'm not even going to say number three thing. These things are all kind of like equal importance to me in my mind. It's just something I've observed over and over again working in the suite with filmmakers is like, yeah, we thought it was going to be like this. I'm like, oh, did you test? Like, we didn't have a chance to test. I'm like, totally get it. Production is crazy, but that would have been the solution there. It's like, I'm trying to think of a specific example right now, but like things, let's just go back to our same one. I thought ISO 1600 was going to be fine on the red because I've always shot on that in my area and it worked out fine. But we didn't test that, right? And it turns out the image is a little noisier and a little chunkier in the bottom than I really would have wanted. Something we could have easily discovered by going through some testing, right? So that's the idea there, is like whatever your hypothesis is or whatever your question is, it's a lot better to take the extra time going out there and testing it than to spend an hour or 2 hours or however long asking around for opinions online. Like that can be helpful, especially if it's from people you trust. Like I would sooner look to peers who you trust than to ask the internet, because the internet will give you very mixed answers. But there's truly, at the end of the day, no substitute for testing out the exact question you wish to see tested and running it through the filter of your taste and your needs after you've actually gathered the image. So that's it. Use a high context viewing LUT, keep the image off the floor, and test stuff. And those are like three very simple, very humble suggestions that I often will make to cinematographer collaborators when we're talking about like, hey, from your chair, what have you seen? What are some things that would be helpful, easy multipliers to the cinematography process? So that's all I got for you guys. Questions on this?
Question about monitoring on set and recreating that look after that in Resolve. What is better to recreate the look that was done on set? The manufacturer lookup table or color space transform?
Ra, if you can help me make sure I'm understanding correctly, are we asking if you are going to recreate a hybrid LUT where it's just all one thing that gets you out to display, would we be better off recreating that LUT using a CST or recreating it using a camera manufacturer LUT?
I guess the question is if they are not using any lookup table, but the lookup table from the manufacturer. For example, if they are using the default ARRI-LUT, is it better to use that ARRI-LUT or a color space transform to see what they did on set?
I see. Okay. Yeah, I mean, look, if you're already at the point where you've shot something and you've shot through the manufacturer LUT, I'm going to assume that was you sort of pushing off the decision. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think in 99 out of 100 cases, if you're shooting through the manufacturer LUT, it's not a question of you consciously deciding this is the look of my show. I think it's more like, we'll worry about that later, right? So in that sense, it doesn't really matter a ton. Like we actually talked about this in our last episode of Grade School when I was talking about the opposite of today's conversation, things I've learned about color grading from cinematography, right? And from cinematographers. One of the things I talked about in that conversation was that from the colorist POV, from my POV, if you were coming to me and you said, oh, well, we shot through the camera manufacturer LUT and I was going to be putting up images for our first session for you, I would run those through the camera manufacturer LUT just because as of right now, that's your baseline, that's your reality, that's what you will recognize as your image. Now, will we stay there or will we end up finding a completely different way of rendering the image? That depends on our collaboration and on our conversation. So if from my POV as a professional colorist collaborator, that would be my answer. From the POV of a person who gathered the image and is now looking to really sort of like author it and build its pipeline and with a bit more intention than was done on set, doesn't really matter. Like you can try the camera manufacturer LUT, and an easy way to think about it is like just look at both versions and be like, all right, which one is closer to my creative intent for the image? Like here's our manufacturer LUT. Here would be a CST. And we can just compare the two. Although actually I did that wrong. I'm kind of toggling in between different color management setups here. Ooh, the dreaded double transform. I don't know about that vibe. All right, so there is our camera manufacturer transform properly applied, and here is our CST in like a DaVinci wide gamut color managed pipeline. So DaVinci wide gamut, manufacturer transform. I mean, they're pretty close, right? Like I would say maybe an even simpler way of looking at it is like, look at what you shot through and then look at like the CST, if that's your sort of like comparison that you're wanting to make. Look at the two of them, and unless the CST like really shows something more or better that you're like, I love that starting point so much more, just go with the manufacturer LUT and then build a look underneath that. That would probably be the simplest way to look at that scenario.
Question about camera testing. Do you have any good cheat sheet of things to capture for camera tests?
No, no, I don't. I think it really depends on what you're trying to do. I got a question the other day on Instagram that comes up a lot. Like, where do I go to learn color science? And this is a tangent, but I promise it's going to connect back up. To me, the only way to answer, like, I've never once successfully set out to go and learn color science. In the same way that I've never once successfully set out to come up with a list of things that you would definitely want to shoot in any camera test. I think it's a bit too abstract. It's much easier to be like, hey, I want to see how the production designer's choices are going to render out onto the screen. Or I want to see what level of overall graininess or noise I'm going to get in my image when I rate this camera at a 3200. Like, once you have a specific need, it becomes pretty easy to design the right tests, right? And it becomes a creative exercise for sure. Like, you can think about that in a lot of different ways. Like, all right, how would I measure noisiness? It's like, well, what's the cleanest possible image that I could gather so I can compare to that? Like, let's do it at like 200 ISO and then figure out how to kind of compare those things out. But I think it all starts with like, what specifically are you trying to test? If you're talking in really broad strokes about just like, like testing images, general images to evaluate your work on, like some simple things that you can do there is like, like you guys have seen me use this image many times. I like this image because it's a real world image. It's a good bit less like sort of abstracted than say Isabella, like this. And yet it has lots of different colors in here. We've got, her blouse, the orange juice, the teapot, the fire truck, the foliage, the walls, like this blue pen, like this, these flowers over here. There's lots of different colors and a good range of tonality to look at in there. So like, that's a simple thing to look at. It's like, what are some different like scenarios and lighting conditions that I could capture so that you could look at, like, go back to script formatting, like day interior, day exterior, night exterior. What kind of subject matter are you going to have in the frame? Generally, that's going to be people, but there's also like, what are other objects that we often photograph? So you could start to build up kind of a library of test images in that way, but I think that's a bit different than the type of testing that I'm really advocating for here, which is this, to say like, what are the key questions or the key assumptions of the thing that I'm about to shoot that I could really stand to validate by designing the right tests.
Question about ISO. Is there any like sweet spot between using pushing ISO to get more texture on your image, but also perhaps monitoring the signal with a lookup table that takes down one stop to force you to get more light in the sensor? What is your approach or thoughts on that?
This is interesting. Yeah, I mean, so just because the phrase literally came up, like I will mention my exposure tool that I released for free last year that's called Sweet Spot, that's designed to help you find the sweet spot of your camera sensor within whatever ISO that you're in. We'll leave a link to that in the, Raf, do you have a link to that handy? Can you pull one up?
For your sweet spot tool, right?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So we'll drop a link to that for you guys, for anyone who's interested. But to go back to the question, is there a sweet spot of like where to set ISO? Like, can you rate it a little bit higher to get more noise, but then drive the camera to, like have the camera sort of like bias you to drop your stop, I would say like first answer there, definitely a testing thing. Like it's going to depend on what you're shooting, the camera you're shooting on, what your creative intent is, what your taste is, what the taste of the other people you're working with is. But remember that like fundamentally you are, if you think about kind of like your degrees of freedom, there's the amount of light that you're admitting onto the sensor, essentially, is what it comes down to. So if you are boosting ISO, for example, like you're going from 800 to 1600, well, that's going to cause you to need one less stop of physical energy in that scene in order to get what feels like a healthy exposure. So if you were then to run that through a viewing LUT, which biases you, which drops everything by one stop, as you suggested, what's that going to mean? That's going to mean that you're now going to be rebiased to opening everything back up. So essentially, like in that scenario, just to kind of like sketch it out, ISO 1600 pushed one stop is going to be identical to ISO 800 shot at 0 stops, if that makes sense. Shot with no intentional push, shot through a LUT which does not drop exposure. Those are actually going to net out to be the same thing. These, by the way, are tests that are very worth running for yourself and finding out, is Cullen right about that or is that totally wrong? But that's what you're going to find when you go to shoot tests like that. And that can be a really helpful thing to start looking at. How can I simplify this a little bit? So if you're looking at like just more generally, how do I optimize my relationship, like optimize for ISO? I think you start by testing one thing at a time, right? Like, all right, let's just shoot a bunch of brackets of different ISO ratings with the same aperture and the same, like physical scene. And what you would do is actually do what my buddy Joe does, who I mentioned a minute ago, drop NDs in there. Like as you are altering ISO, use your ND as your degree of freedom. Or if you're shooting stills, you can use shutter angle if you want. But ND is probably going to be the easiest and the most sound thing to use to end up with the same net exposure. And now all you are going to be comparing is your ISO between those different situations, right? Once you've got a sense for that, you can add other variables into the mix. But at least in the specific case that you called out there, boosting ISO by a stop and then dropping it a stop through your LUT is essentially going to be the same thing as if you had never boosted ISO and never dropped your exposure or stop in the LUT.
Question from Kaya. Are there any ingredients to a look that you think are better captured on set rather than in post? For example, contrast is the first thing that comes to his mind. So, what do you think is better done on set or in post?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So contrast is a good one. Now, captured on set versus in post becomes like we have to get kind of geeky about details here. Captured on set, I am going to define as what you show to the camera sensor, not what you see through your viewing LUT. Like what you see through your viewing LUT, that's really the beginning of the grading process. And contrast is an example that kind of comes first to mind for me as well. And I'll tell you this, generally speaking, you want to get, there's an upper limit of contrast that you want to do on set that exists where your image is starting to be pushed into the noise floor. So like, to try to make a slightly more tangible example of it, if we look at this image and we're like, all right, so like I'm using right now using Contour, my look development plugin, and it's giving me like quite a bit of contrast, like not a crazy amount, but a good amount, right? So the question could be like, all right, well, what if I didn't impart that contrast in the LUT, in the viewing transform, in the grade? What if I just lit to a higher ratio on set? Like, where do I sort of like strike the balance there? I think that's fundamentally what you're asking, whether it's contrast or something else. But let's think about contrast for a minute. This one's a good example because, like, to me, there's a principle we can observe that, like, we don't want to increase contrast any further in camera than allows us to stay off the noise floor. Okay? So the more you increase contrast, the more you're going to end up driving not just fill side of subject, but other random things like the darkness under the counter over here. The more contrast that you do in camera, the more of those heavy dark pixels you're going to functionally be landing on the floor of the image. And once they're on the floor, it's like chewing gum. You can't really pull them off, right? So within that parameter, I think there's lots of different ways to solve for it, but that would be like kind of like where that's where contrast comes in post, is when we're like, we still want to do more, but we don't really want to get more in camera because we're going to start to drive pixels down into the noise floor of the image. So that's kind of the balancing act that you want to strike, is getting to where you are capturing as healthy of an image as you can in camera, and then running that through a viewing LUT so that you're capturing the right image for your creative intent, but also letting that viewing LUT do the things that are going to be better done in post, with contrast being like, that's probably the easiest example that I could think of, like most straightforward example. So I'm glad that's the one that came up. That's how I think about that. Like, no more contrast in camera then allows you to stay healthily off the floor of the image.
Question about color temperature. If you are using natural lighting, you're outdoors essentially, and want a creative rendering of your image, will you use creative white balance on camera, or will you simply put a regular white balance, like a neutral one, and then apply a lookup table that you made in post, or fix that in post?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question. There's like a couple variables that come to mind for sure. Like, if you're shooting raw, then like your color temperature is essentially, this is a weird factoid that I've shared with you guys before. It's actually not a factoid, it's just a fact. Camera sensors, digital camera sensors, they actually only have one color temperature, and they are adapted to other color temperatures via the same mathematics that are used in software like Resolve. So in that sense, like if you're shooting raw, that's pretty straightforward. Like you can, if it helps you with monitoring the image, you can look at it through that sort of warmed up filter, if you want to think of it that way. I'll give you guys my take on this. I feel like this for me goes all the way back to, like, I remember shooting video way back in the day. Did anybody ever, I mean, I feel like I'm really going to date myself here because I haven't seen this done in a long time. Anybody ever mess around with the warm cards? You guys know what I'm talking about at all? I'm going to check the chat for when that comes up, just because I'm real curious if the warm cards were a thing for anybody else. I bring up the warm cards were essentially like cards you would use to white balance your camera that were cooler than white. So what does that mean? That means that you balance to a cooler white point, you get a warmer image, right? Gosh, going all the way back to that and going all the way now up to like working the color temperature slider of the camera raw tab to get a warmer look, or working even worse, like the temp knob of the HDR palette. I feel like 9 times out of 10 when I'm with like the clients who I work with and we're talking about, oh, we want to do a warm thing, that's not as simple as color temperature. Color temperature is really not the best way to think about that. In fact, like I've talked to you guys about this before, but like my go-to for stuff like that is I've got a tool. Oh, I'll have to show this to you guys another time. But I have a tool like one of my go-to balance tools essentially allows me to say, pick a color and then move the image toward that color. That feels to me much more sort of creatively contextual than using color temperature. Like color temperature is an arbitrary convention that doesn't I feel like necessarily help me get to the exact visual outcome that I'm looking for. So that's what I would say there is like, sure, if you want to like, mismatch your source, your light source, and like the way you've rated your camera in terms of Kelvin, and that's helping you get an image that you'd like to see, then that's cool. I think it's the best thing in that scenario, like the perfect scenario would be you knew the color of light you were going to be getting that day, or you knew the source of light you were going to be getting that day, and you actually built a viewing LUT with your particular flavor of warm built into it that is like allowing you to get to like the preferred type of warm that you really want. A last tangent that I'll mention here, I was at a party this weekend and we were sitting around a fire at one point, and I was like very happily observing how I didn't need to correct anybody's overly warm, overly ruddy skin tones from the fire, which relates simply because when you're shooting fire, it's kind of tough to know where to rate your color temperature if that's indeed like your sole or one of your big sources of illumination. It's like, is this like 1,000 Kelvin? Like, what do I set my color temperature to? As a result, I feel like most of the scenes and shots that I've graded where people are firelit or where firelight is part of the scene, it's so warm and so ruddy feeling in a way that I'm like, firelight should feel warm, but it doesn't feel like my kind of warm. It doesn't feel like the warm that I want to see. So that's the ideal question to start with, is like, what's the warm that you're looking for, and how can you plan to see that exact warm, if possible, on the day that you're capturing?
Question about green screen. Is there any weird approach to color grade something on a green screen that was filmed in log?
Read me the question one more time. Is there any way to grade green screen?
Yeah, that was shot in log.
Not that I can think of. I guess I haven't done like a ton of green screen stuff. I've certainly done some. Um, and I feel like the big variables there come down to like how well was the green screen shot and how good are the comps that are being done. I would say like here's a good one. The trick, if anything, is like I always try to emphasize this. Like you guys may have heard me talk about this before. In general, with VFX exchange, I'm really big with my clients and like it's cool. Like VFX can work in parallel with color. Like I don't need you to lock VFX before we can start color. We'll work on the camera originals and then we'll swap in VFX renders as they come available. Even if it's revisions, like we can hot swap those in as they are revised. Like that's usually fine. The challenge in general with that is like, all right, until we have the final VFX render, we don't have the full context. So I always kind of give that caveat, but that's especially true with green screen. Like it's, in my opinion, a waste of time to grade green screen before a comp has been done. Until I have an image with a composited background that's in the original camera space, it's really hard to make any kind of decision about what to do. Because fundamentally, like the simplest way to put it is like, I'm looking to like move away from green because I'm getting flooded with green and everything feels washed because my eyes are being biased in that direction. So that's maybe the big rule of thumb that comes to mind for me for a green screen is like, let them do the comp so that you can grade a shot and not an idea of a shot, and not a shot where your eyes are going to be biased or try to like account for that big wall of green that's hitting behind your subject. Also, when it's comped, that's when you can actually deal principally with whatever things do need to be corrected as a result of the green screen. Like there's usually a little bit of spill, a little bit of kind of like poisoning from the green screen bouncing back onto the talent. That actually is something we need to deal with. But good luck trying to perceive if there's a subtle cast of green in the fill side of the subject's face when you're looking at them standing against a wall of green. You know what I mean? So those would be two good ones. Really, it's just one good one with a sub bullet. Like grade a comped final image and then use that as the basis for making your more nuanced decisions about, like neutralizing any washes that have happened. Even things of like with green screen, I often request a matte, because if there's a matte, then I can separately grade foreground and background even further, either to bring them a little bit more together or to blur the background out a little bit more. Like there's strategies you can use there as well. Hope that's some helpful general ideas.
Do you have any tips for testing cameras that have dual native ISO? And I want to add to that question, what do you think of cameras that offer super high native ISOs, like Sony, for example, with the 12,000 whatever native ISO? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, oh man, I'm so glad this came up because I don't really have any tips. I just have interest in the results of such tests. I've been meaning to run them myself and kind of figure out what's going to be best. Here's what I can tell you guys. Actually, the camera that I'm looking at right now, this is the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, and a while ago I kind of did a deep dive on like, all right, how can we get like the best quality image possible out of this camera? And I'm going to totally forget the particulars now, but I want to say the second native ISO on this camera, it kicks in pretty low. I want to say it kicks in at like maybe at 1280 or at 1600, like somewhere around there. So an easy thing that I found like from testing that is kind of obvious once you make the observation is that like with that ISO, as you are approaching that second point, you're going to get noisier, and then it's going to clean right up. So I think like the tangible action that I took, like let's just say I could be totally wrong about this, and some of you guys may even know in the chat, you can correct me. I want to say that the second native ISO on this Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera hits at 1600. And I think what had happened is I might have been shooting my YouTube stuff like at 1280. And I figured out like, oh, you're actually going to, through testing, through capturing same exposure with like, like compensating ideally with ND. And I think that's what I did in this situation, like compensating with NDs, like what am I getting at these different exposure points? And I noticed like, oh, we're getting noisier, 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 noisier. But then going from 1280 to 1600, quite counterintuitively because of the dual native thing, the image was getting cleaner at 1600. So now, again, like I might be wrong about those exact metrics, but whatever that flip point was, that switch point that I realized was where that was happening, that's where I shoot on these cameras now because it's cleaner than being one stop down lower. Now, the alternative and the other test to run would be like, well, is the first or the second stop of native, or the first or the second native ISO point going to give you cleaner images? My intuition and my like confident guess would be it's going to be the lower one, right? But how different will they be? How much cleaner will that lower one be? Does that make a difference to the type of images that you are trying to author? These are all great questions to test that you can test for by shooting bracketed exposures. Again, like controlling the net result image while altering that ISO so that you can just compare how does this ISO feel at different points. This is, again, a great opportunity to just reemphasize like testing 101, like scientific experimentation 101, you want to test one thing at a time. If you're testing two things at a time, you don't actually know what you're testing, and it's too easy to falsely correlate or misattribute what you're observing from one variable when it's actually another. So you want to have one variable at a time. So in the case of something like this, that variable would be ISO and making sure that we're capturing ISO samples at both the first and the second level of dual native. But I actually want to do more testing on that. I've been trying to get my friends, like my DP friends, to do more rigorous testing like that on like, big kid proper cinema cameras. Blackmagic pocket cinema cameras, fine. No shade, Blackmagic. But like on Alexas and Sonys and things like that, to get a real sense for like, all right, with these like crazy fast second layers of native ISO, how do they perform against the first layer? And what differences can be discerned in the final image? So lots of ideas on how to design those tests, but I haven't done anything beyond my little test that I mentioned for my humble YouTube camera here.
Sasha is here and she wants to know how to deal with black point that reaches zero. He's got a DP that loves his black point reaching zero, but it seems that on her scopes sometimes it goes a little below zero. Is there any way to ensure it's within legal ranges before exporting?
Oh, this is a good question. So I feel like there's a lot of, this is something that comes up a lot, gets discussed a lot. And like from a pure colorist, like creative point of view, I always find it to be really simple. Like the display can't show less than zero. If I send -1 to the display, it's going to look identical as if I sent it 0. So I'm not too worried about that. And in most file encoding formats, you're going to have the same thing. Like if you try to encode a -1 to a file, it's going to encode it as 0 because it's clamping, it's bounding at the point of encode. So I actually wouldn't worry about it too much. It's not something you're going to see. And even like here's my crazy thought. Like even if there was a file you could encode to and it would encode those negative values without properly clamping them, what's the difference? No display is ever going to show them. You'll never see them at all. There may be QC or sort of like logistical reasons to make sure that's not the case, but from a visual standpoint, it literally doesn't matter. It can't matter, right? So I think that's the simplest way to think about it. And I would say the sort of companion suggestion or idea that I would throw out to you there is when it comes to the visual aspect of it and how that zero black point looks. By the way, I feel your pain. That's zero black point is tough to work with in my opinion because it can feel so clippy and clumpy. One suggestion that I'll throw out to you guys that is I find helpful in color grading when I'm working with a client who like they really want deep shadows and they're not necessarily super bought into like a lifted black point. Like if we look at this one right now, this is probably going to be a great example. Let me turn this curve off here. And if we look at our I'm just going to enable and disable the curve itself. Like that's a strong net increase in contrast, and it doesn't really feel smoky or printy in the bottom, even though I'm 9% off the floor. So sometimes it's just a matter of hitting that overall contrast, or like in the case of like with contour, I'm making this example using contour, but what I'm really talking about is control that you have with any curve that you could draw for contrast on your image. The other thing that you can do with like getting a thicker feeling in the shadows without actually needing to touch the floor, which for me is like almost a no, almost a never. Like I really, really will fight and avoid letting the image touch zero most of the time, even when we want strong contrast. But the other thing you can do here is, like I often talk about weakening the toe so that you can keep a little more detail down on the bottom. But if you want it to feel heavy and, like really rich and strong in contrast down below, you can do this. A little bit like, take a look at how that's affecting deep shadows like this stuff over here. When I sweep that, or wait, not toe length, the toe strength rather. Yeah, when I sweep this from like weakest possible toe to strongest possible toe. This is all happening below mid-gray, right? But that's having a big impact on like the weight and the heaviness of dark shadows, right? So there's other ways to get at getting rich, snappy contrast without having to necessarily let your scopes hit zero. But going back to your original question, I wouldn't worry about it at all. You're never going to see values that drop below zero, and they're not going to encode to your file anyway. They're going to get clamped off.
Camera team is here, and he wants to know if you have any specific stress testing method for your footage, for testing how far can you manipulate your image before it breaks. Specifically, he's talking about documentary work where the lighting can be a little bit tricky to work with. So, any tips for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really comes down to it's so, like you guys know from hanging out with me before and from reading the colorist 10 commandments, like macro beats micro. Like any solution that can solve for a large number of scenarios or a large number of shots, whatever we're talking about, that's fundamentally more valuable. But what I've definitely found is like that's a matter of like the show and the camera and the creatives involved. So like you could look at designing a test of like how many stops can I be over in my camera and still be able to pull those back and have them look as I wish through my pipeline to my taste. Like all those variables kind of matter. Two different like sets of particulars there might yield two different answers. Like you might be shooting an Alexa 35 and have like a very strong roll in the top, and like under those circumstances be able to get like whatever, like 5 stops over or whatever it is, like 9 stops over. Others might find like, hey, I can't really go more than 3 stops over because I really like, maybe you like a darker image, or you really like to just bring your intent for the show, for example, could be that like everything's going to be really printed down and live lower down, which means highlights are going to be brought further down, which means that they need to be captured more robustly than the very tippity top of the sensor is really capable of. So no, I don't have any fast tips, more just like encouragements into like ways of thinking about this that you probably don't need, Tim, in terms of like the camera side of it, of just thinking about like not only what can the camera do and what can it hold up to, but like what am I going to ask that footage to do for me later? Like how far can I like overexpose and still be okay? Well, it depends on what you're going to be doing in the grade. If your grade itself calls for a bit of underexposure, you're going to have less room for error there. If your grade itself, if you've got a modern camera and you're going to want to park those things up in the top, it's still worth the test and the measurement for sure, but you're going to find like, wow, there's actually quite a bit of room for error before I've got problems going on there. So I definitely think all about the specifics and like designing the tests that are going to illuminate the answers you need for your particular project.
We have a few questions, not questions, but comments. Congratulating yourself about becoming part of the ASC. So, what does it feel to become an American Society cinematographer?
Oh man, thank you guys very much. It feels awesome, and it feels way more awesome getting to celebrate it with all of you guys who I'm sure some of whom were the ones who were offering so much support when I made the announcement on social media last week and over the weekend. So it feels really wonderful. It feels, I'll put it to you guys this way. It's a deep honor. It's like incredibly humbling to feel like, wow, I get to, like hang out with this group of legends who I respect so much. I'll tell you the number one thing that excites me. And it's really, I would say the two things that excite me the most. I am excited to bring, like you guys have heard me use the expression before, like an expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less. That's me. Like I know a lot about a little, and I've really, really had the chance over the years to dive deep on my area of passion, my area of interest, and I'm very excited to bring what I've learned, to share that treasure with these people who I respect so much and who have they've gone down different rabbit holes. I've learned it even from the ASC members who were kind enough to sponsor me into the organization. We've had deep conversations where I'm able to share different perspectives and stuff that I've gotten to learn from going down my own rabbit holes that they haven't gone down because they're doing their own thing, right? So that's number one. I'm so excited to support and share some of what I've had the chance to learn that cinematographers and ASC members don't generally have time to because they have other priorities and other things they're exploring. Right along with that, for sure, you guys know, like I have this YouTube channel, like so much of what I do in my professional practice today is about trying to right the wrongs I experienced when I was getting my start as a colorist. We can probably turn off Resolve for now. When I was like getting started as a colorist, where I wanted knowledge so badly. I was willing to be patient. I was willing to learn. I was willing to read. I was willing to like humble myself. And it was so hard to get that knowledge. There was no good information on YouTube. There was no color grading information on YouTube at all. When I would ask people who were experts in the field, there was much more of a sort of secret sauce culture at the time where they're like, I'm afraid you're going to steal my clients, so I'm not going to tell you anything. All a very long way of saying I'm very excited to have, I feel like I've been seeking knowledge and wisdom within this field for as long as I've been in it, since I'm, like 13, 14 years old. And I'm very excited to have the opportunity to have the access to that knowledge that being a associate member of the American Society of Cinematographers allows, because now I can participate in all the cool events they do, and hopefully they're probably all going to hate me within the next 6 months because I'm going to be bothering every single member. Like, hey, how did you do that that awesome thing in that show? How did you do that thing? How do you like to think about this? Like, I'm going to be wearing these guys out with like trying to download their incredible brains, guys and ladies. So it's those are the two exciting things: is being able to share what I've gathered, and of course, equally be able to have access to the incredible wisdom and knowledge that is resident in the minds of the members of that group. Well, okay, guys, that was a nice way to round it out. Good grade school session. Thank you guys again for your patience, for waiting for me for an hour. I'm really glad that y'all were all still here waiting for me, because I was bummed I was going to walk in. I was going to be like, walking in late to class and all the students left. I'm glad you guys were here. This was a really good session. I hope you got some good stuff out of it, some simple, practical, actionable things that if you are in production, you can take into your practice as a production professional, or if you're on the post side like me and hanging out in the dark color cave. These are things that hopefully are simple enough and universal enough that you can start to share them with your clients, and they're going to see the benefits that I have seen my clients experience from just incorporating one or several of these ideas into the way they go about capturing their images. So thank you guys very much. Great session. I will see you guys again soon. We got more content coming here on the channel. Lots of exciting stuff coming up that we're going to be sharing more about in the coming weeks and months. So stay with me.